The woman convicted of murdering Mexican-American music star Selena has been denied parole.
I didn't know how to operate a gun. I've never had one. And so...
For nearly 30 years, the story of Selena Quintanilla's death has felt tragically complete. Until now, a long silent voice has stepped forward, and what it reveals pulls the curtain back on secrets buried deep behind loyalty, fear, and control. As new documents surface and familiar faces speak with unsettling clarity, the pieces don't fit the way they used to. Was something ignored, or worse, protected? The mystery is no longer a mystery, and the truth isn't comforting. What unfolded behind that motel room door may haunt fans more than the crime itself. New revelations. After 30 years. For nearly 30 years, Chris Perez, the widower of Selena Quintanilla, largely remained silent about the deepest corners of their life together. In a candid 2025 interview tied to a new docuseries, Perez finally opened up, offering emotional and revealing insights that had never been publicly shared. Fans around the world were struck by the vulnerability in his voice as he described their marriage not just as a love story, but as a sanctuary filled with both hope and hardship. He admitted that out of respect for Selena's legacy and her family's control over her narrative, he had long held back, until now. There are things that need to be said, he explained, not to change the past, but to understand what was happening behind the music. In the interview, Perez revealed how Selena had been dealing with mounting pressure in the months leading up to her death. As her fame soared, so did the expectations from her label, from her father, and from the empire she was building. Chris described nights when Selena would confide in him about feeling pulled in every direction, exhausted but determined. The weight of being a global icon while trying to please everyone, especially her father Abraham, had begun to affect her emotionally. Chris remembered her breaking down during one tour stop, questioning whether she was truly living for herself anymore. These intimate accounts challenged the public's perception of Selena as only joyful and confident, showing instead a complex human figure wrestling with enormous responsibility. One of the most startling things Chris mentioned was private letters and journal entries Selena had written but had never shared. These personal writings, discovered years after her death, contained her innermost dreams and fears. She wrote about wanting more creative control, doubts about whether the people closest to her had her best interests at heart, and even toyed with the idea of stepping away from the limelight to live a quieter, independent life. Chris went on to read selected passages that revealed hints of an awareness on Selena's part that cracks were forming around her, particularly with people she thought she could trust implicitly. In one such moving case, Chris reflected that certain warning signs might have been overlooked or set aside. He said there were people she had doubts about, people she trusted because she felt she had to, leaving the names of such individuals unmentioned. It exacerbated the already settled questions as to how much was swept under the rug in the events leading up to Selena's homicide. Beyond something that offers a glimpse into their love, the interview confronts one with the fact that even stars embraced by adoration can still end up feeling isolated and unheard. Yet behind the emotional weight of Chris's revelations lies a deeper thread, one tied not just to love, but to power, silence, and who really pulled the strings in Selena's world, a father's control. From the beginning of Selena Quintanilla's career, her father Abraham Quintanilla maintained an unyielding grip over every major decision. A former musician himself, Abraham recognized his daughter's talent early and dedicated his life to molding her into a star. As manager of the band Selena y Los Dinos, he not only orchestrated her performances and recordings, but also dictated the artistic direction of her career. While Selena dreamed of recording English-language pop and expanding into crossover markets, Abraham insisted she focus on Tejano music to honor their cultural roots and appeal to their core audience. Despite mounting industry interest in her crossover potential, Abraham often delayed or downplayed such opportunities, believing Selena wasn't ready or that the timing wasn't right. Abraham's strictness extended far beyond business. He was known to enforce rigid boundaries on Selena's personal life, especially when it came to romantic relationships. When Chris Perez joined the band as a guitarist and developed a romantic connection with Selena, Abraham was furious. He saw Chris as a threat to both the family's image and the business empire he was building. Despite the couple's attempts to hide their relationship, Abraham found out and initially fired Chris from the band, demanding Selena choose between love and loyalty to the family. This type of control wasn't just about parental protection. It was also a reflection of how Abraham viewed his daughter's life as an extension of his legacy. Even after accepting their marriage later, his dominance in decision-making never fully loosened. In early 1995, it was Abraham once again taking charge when the suspicions about Yolanda Saldivar began to rise. Employees had reported financial irregularities and had expressed growing concerns about Yolanda's behavior. Abraham went on to investigate the missing funds from Selena's boutique and fan club accounts. After gathering evidence, he confronted Yolanda with Selena and her sister Suzette. He instinctively went into protective mode and acted decisively, insisting against Yolanda. Selena's continued contact with Yolanda, much intended to recover critical documents, revealed the limits of Abraham's control and posed the question of how much real power Selena ever had in the running of her own life. As it stands today, Abraham is inextricably linked in the shaping of Selena's public persona. He has, all the way till present, the control over the music, image, and brand of the deceased through the various family companies. Critics say this ironclad management of Selena's posthumous legacy is frowned upon for its lack of transparency, sometimes choosing to avoid unpleasant truths. Documentaries and dramatizations tend to reflect a Selena reality of Abraham's own approval, and not necessarily the most objective or complete picture. This tussle of upholding a legacy versus confronting history has also complicated what the world remembers about the Queen of Tejano. A love story in secret. Selena Quintanilla and Chris Perez's love story began not on a movie set or public stage, but in the quiet spaces between rehearsals and road trips. Their connection blossomed in secrecy during Chris's early days as guitarist for Selena y Los Dinos in 1989. Selena, already under her father Abraham Quintanilla's strict watch, knew that any romantic involvement, especially with someone perceived as a rebellious rock musician, would provoke backlash. Their flirtation turned into a deep bond, and the couple was soon navigating a relationship built on love, but shielded by fear. Both were aware that Abraham saw Chris as a potential distraction, or worse, a threat to Selena's career and family image. This fear led them to keep their relationship hidden from everyone, including the bandmates they traveled with daily. The turning point came in 1992, when Selena, exhausted by the secrecy and emotionally overwhelmed by the pressure, proposed something bold: elopement. The decision was not made lightly. For Selena, marrying Chris without her father's blessing was both an act of rebellion and a desperate attempt to reclaim control over her personal life. It was also an emotional risk. Chris later recounted that moment in his memoir, saying Selena appeared nervous but resolute, torn between duty and desire. Their courthouse wedding was a mix of adrenaline and vulnerability, two young people deeply in love, yet unsure of what consequences would follow. When news of their marriage inevitably reached Abraham, he was furious, though he eventually relented and welcomed Chris into the family. The damage, however, had already exposed the emotional cost of their secrecy. While preserving its secrecy has been quite trying emotionally for those involved, it has placed considerable strain on the band dynamics. In being ranked as Selena y los Dinos, Chris and Selena had to compartmentalize their being, pretending to be nothing but colleagues while living an entirely different reality off-stage. Tension crept in, especially among those who suspected the relationship's existence. With touring, things would only complicate. Anytime their cramped traveling quarters offered some semblance of privacy to sneak away and steal a moment here and there, they would only heighten their sense of alienation. All the while, the lingering unease that Abraham felt toward Chris would continue to impair the cohesion of the band, creating a knife edge of conflict that never truly dissipated, even when the marriage was finally an open secret. Subsequent interviews by Chris Perez revealed how external pressures would test their relationship, built on mutual love and respect. Living in the public eye became exhausting when trying to build a private life. He did admit to them having fights about anything from separation to not separating, not out of a lack of love, but rather sheer exhaustion. At that young age, they were learning how to handle being married, the fame associated with it, and family interference. Nevertheless, Chris commented that their bond was very real and powerful, a love that remained very much alive even after tragedy snuffed out the flame all too early. The rise of Yolanda Saldivar. Yolanda Saldivar's entry into Selena Quintanilla's life began with what seemed like harmless fandom, but over time, it evolved into something far more insidious. A registered nurse from San Antonio, Yolanda, first approached Selena's father, Abraham Quintanilla, in 1991 with the idea of starting an official fan club. Eager to expand Selena's growing brand and connect with her audience, Abraham approved the idea, unknowingly opening the door for someone whose devotion would eventually cross dangerous boundaries. Yolanda quickly established herself as a passionate supporter, and within months, she was not only leading the fan club, but becoming a familiar presence at performances, events, and family gatherings. Her enthusiasm seemed genuine, excessive at times, but never overtly threatening. That loyalty, however, was double-edged. Yolanda's intense admiration for Selena bordered on obsession, but it was precisely this obsessive loyalty that made her appear trustworthy. She became increasingly involved in the singer's personal and professional affairs, eventually managing Selena's 2 boutiques, Selena, etc., in Corpus Christi and San Antonio. Selena, known for her warmth and kindness, saw Yolanda not just as an employee, but as a close confidant. The Quintanilla family, always wary of outsiders, initially welcomed Yolanda because she presented herself as a tireless worker who would do anything for Selena. Her willingness to go above and beyond, staying late, managing fan mail, and defending Selena at every turn, further ingratiated her with the family. But access inevitably led to control. Yolanda underwent a sort of discreetly vexing higher-up training in business matters relating to Selena, the boutique management and finances. She managed the checking accounts, supervised the payroll for the personnel, and directly dealt with confidential documents. Basically, she operated with little to no supervision. That degree of insider access allowed her to blur the lines between personal loyalty and professional duty. This is when things started to raise red flags. Payments were missed, strange expenses were incurred on behalf of the company, and there were complaints from the employees at the boutique. But because she was so close to Selena, she wasn't so immediately suspect in anybody's eyes. Selena allegedly dismissed these concerns, thinking Yolanda was just too busy or did not understand. That turned out to be a fateful miscalculation. Once the family decided to take serious measures, it was too late. The boutique staff had reported Yolanda's wild antics, emotional manipulation, and sabotage, such as damaging merchandise and pitting employees against each other. Designer Martin Gomez described her as controlling and deceptive. She would invent stories and psychologically torment people. Such disturbing characteristics were often overlooked because of her outward fidelity to Selena. By the time they confronted Yolanda in March of 1995 regarding embezzlement and misconduct, the Quintanillas discovered just how much access and power they had allowed Yolanda to accumulate unchecked. Their blind trust would turn out to be a fatal error. Financial red flags ignored. In the months leading up to Selena Quintanilla's tragic death, troubling signs emerged from within her growing fashion empire. Employees at her boutiques, Selena, etc., in Corpus Christi and San Antonio, began to raise serious concerns about Yolanda Saldivar, the woman who had been entrusted to manage both stores. Staff members reported missed payroll checks, suspicious bookkeeping, and erratic behavior from Yolanda. Some described being intimidated or manipulated when they questioned her authority. Despite these repeated warnings, immediate action was slow. Yolanda's long-standing relationship with the family and her reputation as Selena's most loyal supporter shielded her from the kind of scrutiny a typical manager would have faced. This hesitation would prove costly. Selena's deep trust in Yolanda made the situation even more complicated. By 1995, Yolanda wasn't just an employee. She was one of Selena's closest confidants, someone she believed had her best interests at heart. Selena feared that removing Yolanda too abruptly could not only create internal backlash, but also harm the image of her brand and fan club, which Yolanda also managed. With the boutiques still relatively new, and Selena's career at a pivotal point, she didn't want scandal or disloyalty disrupting the momentum. Her reluctance wasn't rooted in naivety, but in the pressure of juggling fame, business, and personal ties. She believed, perhaps too optimistically, that the issue could be resolved discreetly. On March 9, 1995, Selena, her father Abraham, and her sister Suzette faced Yolanda with piles of evidence on her financial mishaps. Within the internal investigations, really substantial hidden ones about supposedly missing and falsified documentation became exposed. Yolanda kept denying all counts of having done anything wrong when faced with evidence that could prove too staggering. Abraham ordered her withdrawal from all business operations immediately. Although Selena ended, tearfully voicing her call to terminate her employment, it was more than just that. Fundamental monetarily tied documents were still with her, as they would be crucial for Selena's post-audit restoration of order in the companies. In walking against her family's wishes, Selena had actually scheduled a private meeting with Yolanda at the Days Inn Hotel on March 31, 1995, in one last attempt to retrieve those documents. That meeting was to be quick, a matter of procedure. It instead became her last. Selena considered that, no matter what had happened, Yolanda would not hurt her. That trust, with the desire to defend her business and her reputation, was what compelled Selena to go alone. A very heart-wrenching decision pressed upon her, a last act of responsibility that, sadly, took her life. The signs were there, warning her from many directions. In the end, she paid no heed. The fallout didn't end with Selena's final breath. Decades later, the consequences of that day would resurface in a courtroom battle for justice all over again. Justice upheld or public pressure. In March 2025, nearly 30 years after the slaying of Selena Quintanilla, Yolanda Saldivar became eligible for parole, reigniting one of the most painful chapters in Latin music history. The announcement sent shockwaves across the country, sparking intense public debate over whether justice had a statute of limitations. Saldivar, convicted in 1995 for the first-degree slaying of the beloved singer, had long maintained that the shooting was accidental. Yet her eligibility for early release stirred widespread outrage, especially among Selena's fan base, who viewed the act as cold-blooded and deliberate. News outlets, social media platforms, and community forums quickly became battlegrounds for opinion, with some advocating for the legal right to parole, while others insisted the severity of the crime warranted permanent imprisonment. On March 27, 2025, the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles formally denied Saldivar's parole request. In their public statement, the board cited the brutality of the crime and stated that Saldivar posed an ongoing public safety risk. They emphasized that the premeditated nature of her actions, luring Selena to a secluded motel room under false pretenses, then shooting her as she tried to flee, was evidence of both intent and disregard for human life. The decision was met with relief by many who feared that early release would send the wrong message about accountability and consequence, especially in cases involving public figures whose legacies extend far beyond their lifetimes. Parole proceedings brought the fans to action. Thousands signed petitions demanding that Saldivar remain behind bars, some gathering signatures at Selena-themed events and memorials. Campaigns went wild online, with hashtags such as #JusticeForSelena and #DenyParole trending on social media. Vigils were held in the cities, Corpus Christi and Los Angeles, which still see Selena's fame. These grassroots efforts were indicative of other things as well, not mere celebrity worship. They echoed a collective trauma and a desire for preservation of her memory. For fans, denial of parole was not so much a punishment as the protection of a justice already paid dearly for by Selena's death. In the wake of the decision, several members of Selena's family responded publicly. While this does not take away the hurt, I am grateful that the law affirmed that Selena's life did matter, said Chris Perez, who is her widower. Abraham and Suzette Quintanilla also made comments, thanking supporters and reiterating that justice has prevailed once again. This isn't about vengeance. It is about keeping the memory of betrayal and violence alive. The family members, as well as the fans who adored her, were given bittersweet closure through the parole denial, which served to reaffirm Selena's eternal legacy. Yolanda's evolving story. In the years since her conviction, Yolanda Saldivar has rarely spoken publicly, but recent interviews ahead of her 2025 parole eligibility have drawn significant backlash. In these statements, Saldivar altered the narrative of what happened in that Days Inn motel room on March 31, 1995. Contrary to her original defense that the shooting was an accident, Saldivar now portrays Selena as confrontational, claiming the young star escalated the situation and that she, Yolanda, was acting in fear and confusion. This shift in tone and focus paints Selena not as the victim of a calculated betrayal, but as someone who partially triggered the tragedy through a heated argument, an interpretation that has been widely rejected by both eyewitness accounts and forensic evidence. Legal analysts were quick to point out the problems with Saldivar's evolving narrative. Any parole board considers not only the crime itself, but also the offender's willingness to accept responsibility and express remorse. By reframing the incident as something Selena allegedly provoked, Saldivar essentially deflected blame, weakening her own credibility. Experts noted that her failure to acknowledge full responsibility likely played a direct role in the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles' decision to deny her early release. Accountability is key in parole decisions, said one legal commentator. When you start revising history to soften your role in a brutal act, it raises serious doubts about your sincerity and rehabilitation. Negative public reaction to Saldivar's claims was overwhelming and swift. Selena's family members, particularly her sister Suzette Quintanilla, looked upon the assertions as an affront to Selena's memory. Chris Perez, who is Selena's widower, said he was angered and saddened by a term he called a desperate revision of the truth. Fans took to their social media network, blaming Saldivar for trying to malign public opinion and regain control of a narrative long shaped through trials, eyewitness accounts, and even Selena's words as she lay dying. For most, the timing of her interviews, so soon before the parole hearing, seemed to be deliberate to gain sympathy rather than a reflective act of genuineness. Criminal psychologists allege that Saldivar's behavior reveals a history of manipulation. At the same time, they assert that even after her conviction, her consideration for control over the narrative of the story outweighs her expression of real regret. Thus, any attempt by Saldivar themselves to displace the blame not only puts the Quintanilla family in trauma once again, but also poses a risk of public misunderstanding of what really happened. The most dangerous lies are the ones told by those who still believe they're justified, said one expert. For Selena's loved ones and her fans, this changing story of defense is not just an insult. It is unforgivable. The battle over Selena's legacy. In recent years, Selena Quintanilla's story has re-emerged in popular media, but not without controversy. A wave of true crime documentaries and dramatizations has reignited debate over how the singer's legacy is being portrayed, particularly when the spotlight shifts toward her slayer, Yolanda Saldivar. Several productions, including docuseries featured on major platforms like Netflix and Sundance, have leaned heavily into Saldivar's perspective, exploring her background, motives, and mindset. While these stories claim to offer balanced narratives, critics argue that such framing risks drawing sympathy toward the perpetrator instead of centering on the life and achievements of the victim. For many fans, these portrayals feel like a betrayal of Selena's legacy. Critics and cultural commentators have not held back in their responses. Many contend that true crime formats often glamorize or humanize slayers for entertainment value, rather than respectfully exploring the victims' lives. In Selena's case, this issue is especially sensitive due to her enormous cultural significance and the young age at which she was slain. Episodes that linger on Saldivar's childhood, psychological state, or prison experience have been called exploitative and even irresponsible. These creative choices, critics say, risk reducing Selena to a tragic ending rather than celebrating the groundbreaking artist, entrepreneur, and role model she truly was. The danger lies not just in revisiting history, but in rewriting it through an unnecessarily sympathetic lens. With the closing of the acquisition by Netflix of the Selena documentary, which premiered at Sundance in 2025, renewed tensions arose between the Quintanilla family, fans, and filmmakers. The docuseries was sold as a tribute to Selena's impact, but controversy arose over the excessive focus on the slaying and trial and on allowing Saldivar's claims to be heard. For many fans already, particularly in the Latino community who grew up idolizing Selena, this documentary felt like the tearing open of emotional scars long healed. The issue turned very ethically inclined in social media and fan forums. Is it right to monetize a tragedy? Is it informative to provide a platform for that claim and a convicted homicide, or just exploitative? Responses from audiences are divided. Some fans welcome the renewed attention, saying it keeps Selena's memory alive and brings her to new generations. They argue that even imperfect representations provoke conversation and awareness. Others argue that these depictions eclipse her legacy, dwelling too heavily on her death and failing to capture the essence of her life. They fear that Selena becomes merely a side plot in someone else's story. What is certain is this: although the debate goes on, Selena's influence is undeniably powerful, and so is the duty to present her in ways that reflect her influence, not simply her tragedy. Family versus critics. The Quintanilla family, particularly Selena's sister, Suzette, has taken a firm stance when it comes to shaping the late singer's public image. In response to criticism surrounding recent documentaries and dramatizations, Suzette has publicly dismissed the backlash, asserting that the family alone has the right to decide how Selena is portrayed. "What critics," she said in one interview, brushing off accusations of exploitation. For the Quintanillas, control over Selena's narrative isn't just about legacy, it's about loyalty. They have repeatedly emphasized their commitment to protecting Selena's memory from being distorted, even if that means tightly regulating how her story is told across all media platforms. This control extends to every aspect of Selena's brand, from licensing agreements to production partnerships. The family's business entity, Q Productions, manages Selena's music rights, image, merchandise, and film or television portrayals. Their decisions reflect a deliberate strategy to ensure that any official content aligns with how they believe Selena would want to be remembered. This includes approving projects like the Netflix biopic series Selena the Series, as well as participating in documentaries that offer exclusive footage and family insights. However, these licensing choices have not been without controversy, as critics argue that family-approved portrayals often avoid uncomfortable truths or downplay complex dynamics, particularly those involving Selena's relationship with her father and the circumstances leading up to her death. Commercialism and authenticity are the twin junctures around which the debate revolves. Whereas the family posits rehabilitation of Selena's true essence, some fans and cultural commentators argue that financial considerations may also weigh upon their choices. Family-approved projects tend toward a smooth, idealized portrait of Selena's life, shying away from awkward themes such as internal dissent, personal struggle, and professional squabbles. This begs the question of whether it is the full picture or only the family-approved story that the public is privy to. With the phenomenon of Selena's post-mortem ascent to fame, the line that separates honoring her from commercializing her becomes more nebulous, especially where such content is brokered alongside merchandise drops or album re-releases. Such control has prompted researchers and ethicists to question a much broader issue: the story of a public figure after his demise. Who really owns it? Legal rights and a family connection can draw people close, but fans, historians, and the public, much larger, often feel their entitlement to more knowledge about cultural icons. For instance, in Selena's case, her story belongs to millions who see themselves reflected in her journey as a new cultural icon. While debates rage over who controls Selena's legacy, one place holds answers no narrative can spin: behind the closed door of Room 158. The final mystery. Room 158 of the Days Inn Motel in Corpus Christi, Texas, became the site of a tragedy that shocked the world. On the morning of March 31, 1995, Selena Quintanilla arrived at the motel to meet Yolanda Saldivar, who had been recently fired but still held important financial documents belonging to Selena's businesses. According to official records and eyewitness accounts, the meeting quickly turned volatile. By 11:48 a.m., hotel staff heard a gunshot. Moments later, Selena emerged from room 158, bleeding heavily from a wound to her lower right shoulder. As she staggered toward the lobby, she left a trail of blood and cried out, "Help me! I've been shot!" These were not the panicked words of someone caught in a tragic accident. They were the final, desperate pleas of a woman who had just been betrayed. Medical and forensic experts later analyzed the nature of the gunshot wound and found several details that contradicted Yolanda Saldivar's claim that the shooting was accidental. The hollow-point bullet struck Selena at a downward angle, tearing through a major artery and causing massive internal bleeding. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and attempted CPR. But by the time Selena reached Corpus Christi Memorial Hospital, she was brain dead. The extent and placement of the wound, combined with Saldivar's failure to render aid, made the accidental discharge narrative increasingly implausible. Doctors concluded that the damage was consistent with a direct, intentional shot, not a misfire. The most seriously incriminating evidence against Yolanda Saldivar came from Selena herself. In her dying moments, Selena identified her slayer. According to the front desk clerk and police reports, Selena identified her slayer as Yolanda Saldivar, clearly naming room number 158 before she collapsed. This detail proved crucial in the investigation and during the trial, eliminating all doubt as to identity. The flow of information emerging from Selena, amid terror and chaos, became all the more poignant given her clear communication during that horrific moment. The statements constituted not merely a desperate request for help, but also an affirmation that an effort would thereby be made on her behalf to see justice served. If this left you speechless or questioning what's really been hidden all these years, let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss the untold side of the stories you think you know. And if you're ready for more, click the next video on your screen. It's one you won't want to miss.